Hey, it's Ubu, and today I'm going to be talking about my first impressions of the Silent Hill 2 remake. I've got about 6 hours in the game now. I've gotten up to the Brookhaven Hospital, and I haven't done anything there. I've just arrived at the hospital and saved the game, and I figured it was a good time to sort of share my thoughts on the game and its early game sort of stuff going on, because it takes apparently around 20 hours or so to beat it. I've seen people beat it in like 14 hours. So depending on, how things are going for you, you can make pretty good time in this game, I suppose. It's still about twice as long, 3 times as long as the original game. Anyways, so my experience with the game so far has been mixed, but I'm going to talk about the positives and just a couple of negatives and just the overall impression the game left on me early on. And leading up to playing this remake, I did make a few videos talking about some of the trailers that they were showing and what I had concerns with and what I think I would hope to see changed before the release of the game. And one of those being is James, his appearance, and I think his appearance in the game is actually pretty solid. So I'm glad they did that. But anyways, I'll touch more on these things as I talk about this today. And hopefully I won't ramble on too long and my points come across in a way that makes sense. So first impressions, just the overall intro of the game, I think was really solid. Everything comes together really well in terms of the game's introduction and its atmosphere and its overall tone, I think is pretty decent early on in the game. And of course, the sound design especially stands out to me in this game, especially with headphones on. The game sounds excellent, the music is really good, and the overall feeling of the game is really held up by the overall sound design of the game, in my opinion. I think it sounds great, and the overall tone of the game, I think, is set pretty strong in the beginning of the game, but I'll touch more on that as we go. But I think the game looks really good. I'm not like huge on like realistic graphics. My games don't need to be the most perfect looking games ever. So coming into this game, I was very much looking forward to just sort of soaking it in and trying to experience it as a remake and not be too critical of it and comparing it to the original game just like constantly. I was obviously doing that, being a big fan of the original game myself, but I also was trying to keep an open mind and not let that sort of feeling really take out from my experience or ruin my experience of the remake. The game, right off the bat, I thought was pretty strong, and I really enjoyed the way the voice acting came across and, James and Mary speaking at the beginning on the observation deck. I thought that was really solid. Now, I want to touch on a couple of issues with this game, just right off the bat here after that. So while the tone at the beginning of the game I think was really solid, I think it does a decent job of what I've experienced to sort of keep that tone. I think the fact that you spend a lot more time in the town and doing sort of odd side quests here and there kind of breaks up that pacing a little bit in terms of the story. And I don't know if that's necessarily a bad thing, but it is noticeable that there is a lot more time between these story beats that we're used to being a little bit closer together here and there, because there isn't so much padding in the game to break it up too much. But I'm going to just sort of try to get the rest of my impressions out of the way, and then I'm going to kind of break down my experience just overall. But one thing that especially stood out to me when I played this game early on was its performance. I don't have the most like crazy computer in the world, but I have a newer CPU than what is recommended, and I'll go ahead and just basically read what's recommended, so that way I can do a little comparison for us here. And I'm looking at Steam now, so it's 64-bit processor, it's Windows 10 at least, and then your processor needs to be Intel Core, but I have an AMD Ryzen 5, 5600G is what I have. And they recommend a 3600X, which is an older CPU. So early on, my CPU was really struggling until I did some adjusting on the settings and added the FSR line into the engine code or whatever. That seemed to really help with FSR. It took a lot of strain off my CPU. But 16 gigs of RAM, which I have, and then the NVIDIA GeForce or an AMD Radeon 6800 XT. I have a AMD 6600 XT. So my GPU isn't necessarily that far off, But anyways, so it says additional notes, playing on recommended requirements should enable to play on medium quality settings in 60 FPS or high quality settings in 30 FPS and full HD or 4K using DLSS or similar technology. And I have a solid state drive as well. So even though my GPU is a little bit under what's required, man, the performance of this game is kind of all over the place. Like, I've adjusted the settings several times to be basically everything on low. Like, most of the cutscenes seem to run fairly well. The cutscenes are capped at 30 frames a second, which is a bit strange, but I don't think it's the end of the world, but it is just kind of odd that they would do that. But anyways, so I have, like, you know, the graphics and everything as low as I can, basically. And I have my FPS capped at 60, and I'm using FSR 3 for performance. And early on in the game, I wasn't using these things. I had to sort of figure all this out, look it all up, so I could get it to run in some way that was enjoyable. But even after doing that, the best that the game ran for me was in the Woodside Apartments. And even then, once you get to the Otherworld section of the apartments and the Blue Creek Apartments, it's like the longer you play the game, the worse it gets. I don't really know how to explain that. Because I was like, hey, this is working pretty well in the apartments. Once you get to the Blue Creek Apartments, and I was still playing, you know, for a long session, and I have about 6 hours in the game. I don't know if I mentioned that. Once you get into the Blue Creek Apartments, you eventually get to the Otherworld section, and the game eventually gets to the point where when you're looking around, it's like real slow, and it's just kind of choppy. But the most ridiculous part, I think, of the performance is just the crazy stuttering that happens. So, like, especially when you're outside in the fog, like in the town itself, like, I'll have noticeable smooth 60 frames. So my computer can do it, but then there's these huge dips in frames and huge stutters that happen. Sometimes they're minor stutters, and then sometimes they're really egregious stutters. And this isn't just me. I went through and read, and this is for the PC, by the way. I think something a lot of people are experiencing that I haven't seen a lot of people talk about necessarily, but I could be wrong. But I looked through all of these Steam reviews because the game is overwhelmingly positive on Steam right now, which I think is good. I want the game to do well, and I'm glad people are enjoying it. But I siphoned through all of the negative reviews, like especially the recent ones, and about 95% of them are people complaining about the performance on PC. And a lot of these people have better computers than I do. They have like 4090s and all kinds of stuff, like crazy computers compared to mine. They're struggling with like low settings as well, and crazy stutters, and I see people mention that a lot, is the stuttering issue. It's just like, they call it like traversal stutter or traversal something or other. And I'm not a tech whiz on computers, but, you know, my computer's been able to play like the RE4 remake really well. The Dead Space remake, it played pretty well, except for the stutters in that game, which they still haven't fixed to this day. Like, I'll play games like Monster Hunter World. Black Myth Wukong functioned really well on my computer. Really had no issues with that game. My computer ran a little hot, but nothing like crazy bad or anything. And it's just weird that this game just doesn't really perform like I think it should on PC, at least not for everybody. And if you don't have any problems with the performance, then, you know, I think that's great. But I think there's still, I was scrolled through negative comments like for like 30 minutes last night, and they just went on for a while. And most of them, like I said, was on performance. And I think that's probably my biggest issue with the remake so far, is like, I expected going into it that I would have to have like low settings or something like that. The game might not look as pretty as I can make it look, but I'm okay with that because I think the game looks fine on low settings. But like the stutters and stuff are just ridiculous. Like it's immersion breaking to the max. Like, I've tried to just put my head down and just kind of deal with it, and hopefully just, you know, the inside sections of like the hospital and stuff, I was hoping would, you know, probably do fine like the apartments did. But it's like I said, the longer you play the game, it almost seems to get worse over time. Like, it'll be real smooth and kind of decent, maybe a stutter here and there, and then eventually the stutters like really kick in, and then all this weird frame drops from like motion and stuff is weird. People complain of ghosting and all kinds of stuff that they've had. Some people have had a lot of bad crashes, and I don't know what, you know, I don't know what everybody is using for their computer, but a lot of people did have like way better computers than I did, and are still having the exact same problems. Some of them struggled even to get 60 frames a second. But the most talked about thing is the stuttering, which I definitely experienced. And it's really unfortunate. And a lot of people are basically saying that it's because of Unreal Engine 5, which I think needs to be re-optimized or like put on hold or something, because I've played games with Unreal Engine 5, but I think maybe Black Myth Wukong uses it. I'm not really sure, but it's like some people know how to use it, and I've played a lot of indie horror games where the game will run fine, but it still strains the heck out of my computer. Like, you can really tell there's a noticeable difference between some games and others when it comes to using Unreal Engine 5. There's something really over the top with its implementation, where it's just not being used correctly. But, you know, this is a AAA studio or whatever that has a huge budget, and I feel like they should have done more quality testing, more optimization. That was the biggest thing I was worried about with this game. And it happened, which was really disappointing. So 6 hours of mostly stuttering has really taken me out of it, and I've tried my best, like I said, to enjoy it, and there are a lot of things that stand out to me that I thought were pretty great in this game. And yeah, I just wish maybe there was a little bit more talk about that, and the fact that it's overwhelmingly positive I think is a good thing, but at the same time, you can't really ignore everybody. I don't think anyone should ignore everyone's complaints on the PC optimization, because it's clearly not working well for a lot of people, and they paid, you know, $75, $80 or more for this game. I think it should function. So I don't know if there's much else for me to say about performance. I mean, it really is probably, I mean, I would say the worst thing about the game, because I think otherwise, if the game ran at a smooth 60, I don't care about 120 or whatever, me personally. If I can get the game to run at a smooth 60 without having crazy stutters and frame drops, I think it would be an excellent game so far. Because I don't really have a lot to complain about in this game. There are a couple things I'm going to touch on in a moment, but yeah, like I said, you can easily find a lot of reviews saying, hey, this doesn't work like it should. I've seen people refund it and everything. Yeah, speaking of negative reviews, another thing that I saw going around, but I haven't really been able to figure out why this is, but people who got the Deluxe Edition, which also on top of that, if you got the Deluxe Edition, you could play the game early. And with the poor optimization, basically people played a game that barely worked or didn't work at all for like so much, like, you know, extra money. That's why I'm always like really hesitant about ever getting a Deluxe Edition like that or whatever, especially nowadays. So people who bought Deluxe Edition, they played the game early for it to mostly not work. And I'm not speaking for everyone, I'm speaking for the people who have had issues with the game. I saw a handful of negative comments talking about the Deluxe Edition includes the full soundtrack of the game, as it's marketed as. So Deluxe Edition says, Silent Hill 2, digital art book, digital soundtrack, pyramid head mask, pizza box. So, and also this picture says Silent Hill 2, original game soundtrack. I saw several negative comments saying that it's not the entire soundtrack. It's like a mini sample of like 10 songs or something. I haven't been able to really figure this out. People have basically said they're not getting what they paid for, and that sounds like they're not getting what they paid for. So I thought there were supposed to be like all the original songs in the game, and then they'd added like new songs. And because I feel like I've heard a lot of tones and music that I'm not really familiar with, or like reworks of original songs or whatever, which all sound great. Music's excellent. But if they're not getting what they were promised, then there needs to be some sort of acknowledgement of that from Konami, because Deluxe Edition is not cheap. It's $80 or more in other countries, and however that works. But yeah, I wanted to draw attention to that, because I haven't really seen anyone talk about it or mention it or anything, or maybe people just haven't noticed or just aren't familiar with it, or I'm not really sure. If you know more about that, just please let me know, because if you're not getting what you paid for, then I think there needs to be something done about that, because that's not fair and it's false advertisement. But anyways, I wanted to draw attention to that. So with performance and everything basically out of the way, overall experience of the game was pretty solid. I think coming into the game, like I said, I was trying to be open-minded, and from what I saw, they've basically been as faithful to the original as I expected, which is pretty close. But like I said, I'm only up to the hospital, so there's a lot more to go. There's a historical society and a bunch of other stuff I need to get to, so it's just some of the stuff in between the main levels, or dungeon levels, even if you want to call them that, feels a little odd, but not too bad. I like being able to explore the town and the shops and stuff, because weirdly enough, I was thinking that this is kind of what I liked the most about Downpour, because I think Downpour is kind of awful, but the town exploration in Downfall is like amazing. I think it's like the best part of the game. personally. I think the overall ambience of Silent Hill and Downpour is really good, but that kind of reminded me of this in a good way. I was like, you know, looking at the fog when the game was running, just like stuttering like crazy outside. But anyways, I was like, you know, the monsters and the depth of everything looked really good. I liked being able to be inside, right? You like, you can run from some lying figures, go inside of a shop, and you can like, you know, look out the window and watch them walking out through the fog. That looked great. I thought that was really cool, actually. So I liked that overall feel of being in the town. Like you're at a disadvantage, like you're in trouble, like you're in danger. Like, so running into a shop and being able to see them walk around, I thought was really cool. I just, something about that looked great to me. Just the way they looked walking around in the fog and stuff like that. The town also reminds me of the movie Silent Hill, which I think is also a good thing because I actually like the first movie. But yeah, the overall presentation of the town and everything I think is really solid. I think coming into it, so, you know, you start on the observation deck and you walk down through the woods. In the original game, it takes, I think, a little bit longer to get through the woods. It's a lot of weird noises and stuff, and the woods section in this opening of the game is kind of short and not really that scary. Then you get to explore sort of some farms and stuff, and then eventually you make your way to where in the original game you'll come across like an underpass where that's where you first get the radio in the original game. And I noticed in this game they'll have things like that changed, so you don't get the radio in that little tunnel anymore, but it's still there and you can like interact with it, and it gives like a little musical tone, basically acknowledging like this is from the original game. It's like almost like a landmark from the original game saying like, hey, this is like a memory of the original game, which I thought was actually really cool personally, because if they're going to make changes, I appreciate that they're still making a reference to the original game by acknowledging that it existed, rather than just being like, it's not there anymore, whatever, don't think about it. I thought that was really cool. That happens a couple more times in the game where, like, the old clock puzzle and also the old coin puzzle are like that, and also the old room where you fight Pyramid Head in the original game. Those are all, like, little memories you come across that play, like, a little musical tone when you find them, and I thought that was pretty cool. So you make your way through, you know, the back roads and stuff, and then you get to the town. The thing about the little puzzles and stuff is that there's not like a lot of direction in this game, especially for newcomers. You just kind of pick something up and you're kind of expected to just know what to do. However, I think a really good tip for this game is to just constantly check your map to make sure, you know, there's new markings or not on there, and to check your key items in your inventory. Your key items is extremely important for kind of knowing where to go. It'll be like apartment room 201 key, so you know, I need to go use this key. That's basically how the pacing of the game goes. There's no real hand-holding or anything like that, but I think it was like one time in the apartments that I got lost because I basically did everything I was able to, and then I was like, well, where do I go now? And I had to go down one of the staircases. There's a lot of staircases, and anyways, one of the staircases in the Woodside Apartments takes you down behind a door you can't open on a different side of the apartments, so just letting you know. Speaking of the Woodside Apartments, I would say they were pretty faithful to the original. Overall, exploring these areas in the remake, like I said, in the town and even in the apartments and places we're familiar with in the original game, I very much like the attention to detail of it looking like a lived-in space, like a lot of clutter and objects, and just the overall, I think, presentation of the environment, I think, is really solid, to me at least. I like seeing that kind of stuff. Like, when you walk in a room and you see just kind of all the unique clutter in the room, like all the rooms don't necessarily feel the same, except for like the kitchenette areas where you look through drawers. That gets kind of redundant. Like, you know, you open some drawers, you get some health items or something like that. Other than that, I like the uniqueness of a lot of the rooms and places you go to. Like each room I go into, I look around and go like, man, this looks pretty cool. Like, a lot of attention to detail of it being like its own space, you know? It's not like a copy and paste kind of thing going on. So I appreciate that a lot. The apartments was a pretty solid level. I thought it was pretty good. I like how they did Pyramid Head. At least to me, he comes across, you know, kind of spooky and weird like he was in the original game. Like when you first see him in the hallway and he's like glowing red. One thing I mentioned, or saw someone mention on Twitter, somebody I'm following, I think his name is David Well or something like that, and I saw some other people talking about this, is they kind of miss the idea of interacting with objects and getting sort of like the random little text like, nothing here is special, or something like that. I actually didn't really think about that playing the remake, but that is something I do kind of miss as well, where you can just interact with a pile of books and it's like, there's nothing here, or whatever. I don't know, I just wanted to draw some attention to that. That's kind of fun to do in the original games. It's just kind of like inspect everything and be like, well, what is this? What is that? What is this? And your character's always got something to say about it, like in the Silent Hill 1 where he's like, Bible. Or like in Silent Hill 3 where, you know, Heather's like, it's bread. That is missing from the game, which is kind of sad, but at the same time, I don't think it takes away from the experience too much. I just wanted to point that out. Yeah, overall, Woodside Apartments and Blue Creek Apartments, if I have those names right, were pretty good. And Woodside Apartments, they have the new coin puzzle, which I really liked, because I don't like the original coin puzzle, like, at all. I really don't. It's extremely vague and confusing, especially on hard. And I'm playing the game on standard difficulty, just across the board, just for first playthrough. But the new coin puzzle, you get 3 coins, and it's got like this riddle on the front of the box, so you can just easily read it. And you get 3 coins, at least in standard. And you read the first riddle, you put the coins in correctly, and then you get a second riddle. It like rotates on top of the box, and then you can flip the coins around and do them in a different order. It's almost like telling a story. So then you do that, and then it flips around again, and then you keep doing that until you finish the puzzle. I actually thought that was really cool. I thought that was pretty innovative in terms of just like put coins in the slots until you get it right, kind of thing. So yeah, I like that a lot. I'm okay with changes like that because, like I said, personally, I just don't like the original coin puzzle like at all. So yeah, it was pretty cool to see. I liked the way the box functioned and stuff and changed the riddle, and that was really cool. I liked that a lot. Aside from that, there's not much else, I think, going on in the first area. You do come across Eddie like you normally do. It's a pretty decent interaction. You come across Laura, you know, kicks the key away from you. All that was intact and felt fine. Everything there was going on pretty well. I think the overall ambience of the apartments is pretty solid. And then you get onto the Blue Creek apartments, where the other world eventually happens. And I like the other world in this game so far. I thought it was pretty cool. It was maybe a little bit more reminiscent of the movie Otherworld, because everything gets like metal, barbed wire, rust and stuff, you know. And that was in the original to a small degree. I think the Otherworld was just a little bit different from our perspective now, but its overall presentation, I think, is a little bit more industrialized. Like, there's some grime and blood and guts and kind of weird stuff like that, but also it's just like very metal, very industrial, like I said. A lot of rust, a lot of metal and stuff. So I think the Otherworld looked really cool. One of my favorite things about the Blue Creek apartments was the clock puzzle, which is a little different this time. It's basically the same thing. You have hours, minutes, seconds based on people's names, like Henry, Mildred, and Scott, or something like that. The area is redone where you actually have to like walk around and find the clock hands in different ways, doing different puzzles for those, sorta. And then as you come back, you'll put a clock hand on the clock and it unlocks another area. You go there to get the minutes, and then you do that until you get all 3 hands. So I actually quite like that. But what was really cool about that, you're in the other world at this point. Each time you get a clock hand, the other world sort of progressively gets worse looking. Things start to change more, which I thought was really cool. Like, there's a hallway where there's a chain link fence in a hallway that's got like a couple of figures that have like cloth or sheets over them, and as you progress, there's like more figures back there, and they get closer to the chain link fence. I like little details like that. I thought that was pretty cool. But like the room where the clock puzzle is gets worse looking. The bed eventually just turns into a metal frame, and everything is just metal. And also, as you do the clock puzzle, you'll hear Pyramid Head walking around, and then you'll start to see like the big scratches on the wall and on the floor of him like swinging his big knife around and dragging it on the floor. I thought it was cool to see that, like him affecting the environment around him. Very cool stuff. I liked that a lot. I thought that was great. And the Pyramid Head fight itself was not bad. I think you can only go up from the original boss fights for the most part. You just kind of stand there and you shoot them, and then you run across the room and you stand there and you shoot them. So the fact that Pyramid Head is actually like walking towards you, it can like actually kill you if you stand still too long, I thought was pretty cool. I like the room you fight him in. There's like a swinging light above you, and he's just like smashing stuff and then coming after you. And as you damage him, he's a little bit quicker, so you have to be a little bit more reactive. And then eventually, you know, you win the fight, the sirens go off, and then he leaves. So I thought that was pretty cool. I actually didn't really have a problem with it. And yeah, then eventually you go on to meet Maria, and you do some exploration there. I thought Maria was great, personally. It was one of the things I kind of alluded to earlier that I had some critiques about in the original trailers. It's just the wardrobe change of Maria to me is just a bit odd. The only reason I say that is I see a lot of weird excuses for that, of why they changed it. My only real gripe about it is I don't see the point of changing it, personally. That's just where I'm at on that. And seeing her in the game, I actually thought she was quite great. Like, her delivery, when you first meet her at least, like I said, this is just what I've experienced so far. I thought she was kind of odd, like in a good way. Just kind of seductive and promiscuous, kind of messing with you when you first meet her. And personally, I think she's quite pretty. I think she's a very pretty woman. I guess obviously modeled after the voice actress for her. I see people say some really odd stuff about these characters, and I'm just like, I don't really get it. I think she's personally like kind of pretty. I actually quite like her outfit, seeing it in game. I've noticed too, the black dress actually has leopard print on it. You can't really see it in the trailers, but when you're in the game, you can tell the black dress she's wearing has leopard print on it, and I think it looks really cool. Also, I should probably go back, sorry about being all over the place, probably go back and talk about Angela a little bit, now that I'm talking about some of the characters. I think Angela did just fine. I actually quite liked her delivery when you first meet her in the graveyard at the beginning of the game. I liked how just kind of meek she was, and I like the way her voice sounds, and I think it works well with her character. I believe she's supposed to be 19, the character, and she comes across as a little bit younger, and I think is a good thing. People have said a lot of really bizarre things about Angela's new appearance and everything, which I think is totally ridiculous. But overall, I think her presentation is pretty solid. I think her line delivery gives her more of the, I don't know how to say it, it's more innocent in a way, like young, innocent, sort of bewildered about what's happening to her. Of course, she's like that in the original game in terms of her voice lines and stuff, but I just think the feeling she gives off in this game is a good way to do the character. I don't have any issue with it. I'll maybe come up with a better way to describe that soon, but yeah, overall, I think Angela's presentation early on in the game, and eventually you come across her in the apartments in the mirror room, and I liked her there too. I know that the voice actress and everything, the original Angela, is kind of hard to follow. She did a really good job. She's like great, but I'm going to give credit where it's due, and I think the new Angela, I think, is doing a fine job. I think the actress and everything and the way they made her character look, I think just really works well. I just don't know how else to say that. I just really like it. I don't know, I just want to help her. Like, she comes across as just a nice person, and I think the way James interacts with her as well, I think worked really well. I don't know. Anyways, yeah, Angela I think is fine. So don't worry about what all the weirdos say about her and stuff and her appearance. I think she did a fine job, and from what I've seen so far. So anyways, back to Maria. I think Maria is just kind of strange, which I like about her. I think she's quite pretty, and I like the way she looks and the way she walks and she carries herself in a certain way. I like that about her. It reminds me of the original Maria. Did a fine job there. And then eventually, of course, James is like really confused because, whoa, you look like my dead wife. But you'll move on to a motel where you do some stuff. And I thought it was weird that in the motel, there's a closet that has Maria's original outfit hanging up in the closet. And then Maria literally even walks over to it and like picks it up and is like, oh, you think I look good in this or whatever? And she's like holding it up, looking at the outfit. I just thought that was kind of odd. Like, I don't know if they're like making fun of us or something, or I'm not really sure why they did that, to be honest. Like, if you're going to put the outfit in the game just to be like, hey, I would look really hot in this, right? Or whatever. I mean, I don't know. It's just really strange. I was like, just really confused by that. Not the end of the world, but definitely weird. So yeah, once you're done with the motel, you move on to eventually run across Laura. or you hear somebody scream, so you go into a movie theater, which is a new location to explore, and I thought it was pretty cool. Laura and Eddie are watching a movie, and then you go off and you try to find Laura, because James is like, how do you know my wife? And there are some things I'm missing throughout this explanation, so don't worry about it too much. It's basically the original game, so I'm not really missing anything I think super important, but yeah, so then you talk to Eddie a little bit. It's kind of a new interaction with him in the theater. It was very strange. I like Eddie in this game. I mentioned him earlier, but I think Eddie does a really good job just kind of being weird like everybody else, and of course, you first meet him throwing up in the apartments, and I thought the interaction went pretty well and was pretty decent. And then you meet him in the theater for the second time, and then you're talking to him there, and he's kind of dismissive more now. He's a little weary of James instead of being as, like, I guess, friendly the first time. You know, because the first time he's throwing him in a toilet, and he's, like, freaked out because there's a dead guy in the refrigerator. So James is like, oh my god, are you okay? And this time, he's like, James is like, we gotta go find Laura. So then Eddie is like, oh, now you want me to go with you? So it was kind of weird. And he's sitting there eating like a giant tub of ice cream with his bare hands, which is really gross. I was like, what the frick, dude? So anyways, I guess you don't go in the bowling alley. I just realized that. I don't, maybe I need to go back and explore it or something, because it seems like they went from bowling alley to movie theater. I don't know why they redid that scene now that I think about it. Kind of weird, because, you know, it's like, how could you be sitting here eating pizza? But as James is talking to Eddie in the movie theater, he, like, sees a pizza box and, like, picks it up. I don't know if they're trying to be cute with that. Kind of odd. Anyways, you leave the theater chasing after Laura, and then you and Maria follow her to the Brookhaven Hospital. And that's where Laura is, and that's where I will continue the game. So, overall, my experience, I think, with the gameplay and the story beats, I think is kind of, I would say it's okay. I mean, I had a good time exploring and looking around, and the overall atmosphere of the game and the music and sound design, I think, is by far its strongest point. One thing I will touch on now that I haven't talked about is the combat. It's also probably the thing I was the most concerned about with my previous videos. The combat itself is almost there as being tolerable. I'm playing on standard difficulty, and you really have to get used to dodging and anticipating enemy attacks. Otherwise, you're gonna, like, eat through your health items, because the enemies actually do quite a lot of damage even on normal. You could be full health, and if a mannequin or something hits you, like, twice, you have a red border around your screen, which you can turn off. And if people didn't know, if you don't have the red border option on, your inventory screen in the back, the color of it is what your health is. So if it's like kind of a just like more of a still image, you're probably full health, but as it gets orange and kind of shaky, you're like damaged, and then the menu will be like bright red and messed up. That means you're at critical health. So if you didn't know that, that's how that works, if you wanted to turn the red border thing off. But yeah, enemies kind of like just beat the crap out of you in this game. The lying figures aren't so bad because they mostly spit at you, all that slime and stuff. I was really glad they let you turn off the quick time event buttons, which I did immediately. So kudos to them for that. There's a good variety of options in terms of gameplay. Things like the crosshair for your gun and things of that nature. I think the options are pretty solid for the most part. So yeah, I turned that off, and I plan on doing, hopefully, a second playthrough with like the 90s filter and more of the UI elements turned off. I plan on doing that eventually as well, but kind of went with a standard sort of default playthrough. The only thing I changed was QuickTime event buttons and like the crosshair. I made it into a dot rather than an actual crosshair. But anyways, the combat is a bit... I'm pretty mixed on combat. While I don't think the attack animations and the shooting is as bad as I thought it was going to be, I actually quite like how James just kind of wails into him and just beats him up, and then he like stomps on him and he's like screaming at them when he's stomping on him and stuff. It's kind of crazy. It's kind of over the top, but I actually quite like it. But I think the combat is just sort of a chore. There are sections where you are forced to fight. There's one early on in the game where you go behind a building in some little courtyard, and or maybe you're not forced to fight there. I don't quite remember. Sorry. There are sections where you are forced to basically fight. You're just surrounded by enemies. A lot of the times, like in the pool where you find one of the keys, or sorry, one of the coins, you can just kind of kite them around the room and then run out. I like that. There are moments though throughout the game, like in the apartments, where an enemy sees me in the hallway and I run away and run into a room and they follow me into the room. I don't like that at all. It kind of defeats the purpose of being able to avoid combat. Otherwise, if they don't de-aggro or leave me alone when I walk into a room than to explore or something for like different achievements and endings, I would imagine you just have to run around constantly to avoid them. Eventually they de-aggro after you go a certain distance, like far down the hall or down some stairs around into a new area. But there are moments where enemies have followed me into rooms or into the staircases in some of the areas, and I didn't like that at all, personally. In the original game, there's little loading screens for each room. It's like they're little instances, basically, so enemies cannot physically follow you into rooms in the original game. I guess I see what they're going for in some way, where they're just trying to make the enemies more dangerous or something in this game, but I would like to be able to run away from them into a room and then leave me alone. There are a few moments throughout the game where they just kind of throw enemies at you all over the place, and you can't really enjoy the environment in some of these areas like you would want to. Generally speaking, most enemies are either in a room or they're in a hallway. They're not, like, everywhere. The enemy density in this game is just a little too high, personally. Especially in the Otherworld section and the apartments. I mean, there's, like, enemies all over the frickin' place, dude. And it's kind of ridiculous. There's a section with Maria as well where you have to run through this alleyway where all these enemies were spawning. It's almost like a gauntlet. I guess you could technically run through that section. I didn't really try. But there are a couple moments throughout the game, too, where the wind picks up and the fog is blowing around like crazy, almost like there's a storm. I thought those were really cool. That happens during that Maria section I was just talking about. Happens on early in the game too, which I think is pretty cool. I like that. I like weather in games. I like that they added a little variety to the weather pattern in Silent Hill, the town itself. So, but yeah, combat itself, I think, might be the worst part of the game for me. And I am not accepting the excuse that, well, the combat sucked in the original game, so it should suck in this game. I don't agree with that at all whatsoever. That's just my opinion. If it's a remake, it should be better, in my opinion. It should be better combat. And I think while I'm actually fighting something one-on-one, it doesn't feel so bad, but there are moments where you'll fight 2-3 enemies sometimes, and you're just kind of getting your ass beat because they're either spitting on you or jumping on you and grabbing you, or like you'll hit them a couple times and they immediately retaliate and hit you, and you're like, okay, well, I need to hit, and then dodge back, and then maybe go in and hit again, then dodge back, and then hit, dodge back. So you kind of have to do this weird dance with enemies to not get hit, because like I said, they do a lot of damage. I would hate to see on hard how much damage they do. It's like you probably get killed in 2 hits or something. I don't really know, but kind of odd the way they did combat. I think overall it's just the enemy density and the way they kind of force you to fight some enemies. I was weary of combat early on, saying like, maybe the combat trailer is just showing what would happen if you do fight. Not that you have to fight all of these enemies. And it seems like they went more in the direction of trying to create instances of forced combat. And I'm not necessarily a fan of that. It only happened a couple times where it's like, I want to explore this building, the record store or something, but there's 2 lying figures in there. Okay, so I guess I have to fight them. But there's 2 of them, so as soon as you start hitting them, your field of view from the other one is probably gone by then. Or if you're looking at both of them, you're going to get hit unless you're a lot better at this game than I am. I think it just adds too many dimensions to combat is my point. It doesn't need to be like that. I don't mind the melee attacks and the way the shooting works and stuff. That's like whatever. But like I said, it's just like enemy density and just the overall presence of enemies is like, there's just too many of them sometimes. Anyways, I've kind of rambled on for a while. It went into first impressions too. I guess it is first impressions, just a lot of first impressions. But yeah, I don't know. Like I said, I'm kind of mixed. While I think there's a lot going for this game that I really enjoyed. I think some of the story beats are broken up a little too much from the exploration. I think while all these things work well in their own regard, the fact that I had so much of a issue with performance, I think might be what's, causing me to be the most frustrated about some of these things. I would probably overlook a lot of this if I could just play the game without it stuttering. I've tried to give merit where it's due, credit where it's due. I think they did a pretty solid job overall so far from what I've experienced. But yeah, combat, it's kind of not great. And I don't know, the original game really has this weird, eerie sense of dread. I don't even know how to explain it. I think the remake is really close to that with its sound design and everything. Because sound design kind of carries the original game in a lot of ways. Just the overall sound of the game is what makes it so great. I think this game is real close to having that achieved. Of course, as I see more of the story beats and everything throughout the game, I'm sure I'll have more to say about that, but we'll just have to wait and see. I'm almost like hesitant to even really play it until they possibly patch it, you know, to continue playing it. Unfortunately, I'm not sure if that's even feasible, like if there even will be an update anytime soon. Hell, it could be months. I mean, I don't really know. I don't know if they even acknowledged the PC optimization, which is just really disappointing. I don't know. I've been looking forward to this game for like 2 years, even with my hesitation on some of the gameplay elements early on and everything. But anyways, like I said, to sort of summarize, I've really enjoyed the game for what it is. I really wanted to give it a chance, and I think I'm actually really surprised of how much better it is than I expected. So, not that I really expected it to be the worst thing ever either, but I'm just pleasantly surprised of its visual and, you know, audio presentation. I think is excellent. I think the voice actors and everybody did a pretty good job so far. I don't really have an issue with any of them or anything like that. There are a few creative choices that are kind of strange to me, like Maria's outfit, and then also like acknowledging that she's not wearing it in the game. I thought was really bizarre. And also changing it from the bowling alley to the movie theater. Like when I say these things, I'm not like, oh my god, it's the worst thing ever, I hate it. It just kind of makes me wonder why. And then the combat is just kind of weak. It has some issues. Not that the combat and the way James interacts in combat is necessarily an issue. It's the enemy density and how aggressive the enemies are, where you're like, it's kind of a chore to fight them. You have to like dodge around and predict their abilities and stuff. Kind of ridiculous, but at the end of the world, there are a lot of enemies you can't avoid, but the enemies that just happen to follow you into rooms, I'm not a fan of that either. There are some new puzzles and stuff here and there. I think the puzzles that have been reworked or new puzzles that have been added, I think are pretty solid. It gives some of them a reason. It gives you more of a reason to explore the town, to do these little side puzzles and stuff like that. I think a little bit of it is drawn out some, but at the same time, it's fun to look around and explore. Look at all the finer details of the town and all the environments and locations. I think are really cool to look in and look at all the stuff in the rooms and everything. Thought it was pretty cool. Overall, I would say my first impressions of the game are pretty solid, but I don't have much else to say about that. I want to hear what you have to say about the game and what your thoughts on it are. If you agree or disagree with me on certain points, I'm okay with that. I'd be okay to have a discussion about it. I like to do that on my channel. Let me know what your performance is on the game. If you have had issues with the game as well, with stutters and whatnot, and even let me know, you know, how good your computer is if you would like to. Yeah, we'll talk about that as well. Hopefully they do some sort of optimization patch or something in the near future. They really got to handle the stuttering. I don't mind having low fidelity graphics to play the game. I just want smooth gameplay. I don't want stutters and huge frame dips and weird stuff like that anymore. Because it's really taken away from the experience, and it's really unfortunate. And I want to hear too if people know more about if you've done the deluxe edition, if the soundtrack is screwed up like people have told me, or people that I've seen talk about, and if you're not getting the full soundtrack like you're basically promised you should. That's what the product says. You get the original soundtrack. It doesn't say you get the first 10 tracks of the original soundtrack or you get part of the original soundtrack. It says you get the full, or not even full, it just says the original game soundtrack. That's what it says. They need to really clarify that. Please tell me if you've had issues with that, or if you notice that you're not getting what you paid for, because I would like to hear more people talk about that, because I find that to be egregious that they would do that to people paying so much money for this game. But yeah, let me know what's up in the comments. I'd like to hear what you have to say, just in general. And if you enjoy my content, hit subscribe, leave a like, comment, and share the video too. This is here for me to just sort of share my opening thoughts of the game and everything, and I hope I wasn't too rambly or anything. These videos I don't do very well with because I get all up in my head about where I want to go, what I want to talk about. I hope what I said was informative in some way to people who are thinking of playing this game, or people who have had shared experience like this and we're looking for someone to discuss it with. So yeah, had a good time talking about this in my experience. So Hopefully they optimize the game, and if they don't anytime soon, I mean, that's going to be really unfortunate. I'm glad there are people who have had no problems with the game as well. That's great, but there are clearly a lot of people who have. So I hope at some point it's acknowledged and more people talk about it. I'm not saying to like review bomb the game or anything like that or whatever, but if you're having a terrible experience with the game, then feel free to share your thoughts and your reviews and do it however you please. I'm just not encouraging that everyone be like, you know, hate this game, but just share your experience in the reviews and customer support even if you'd like, and let them know that it's just not working the way they should. So I don't think I've missed anything. Hopefully I didn't, but yeah, I will eventually update you again on my thoughts on the game. If it continues to function terribly, then I might put it on pause for a while and just go back to what I regularly do here on my channel. Because what I wanted to do was record some gameplay early on, and then, you know, it kind of threw my formula out the window because the game was, you know, performing so poorly. I couldn't even really record gameplay for it. It was just terrible to look at. The stuttering and everything, and it was like I felt like my computer was already strained as it was, so I just decided not to record any gameplay, unfortunately. I did have it recording early on, like the first 10 minutes or something, which I might show at the beginning of the video or something, but I eventually turned it off because I was just like, holy crap, this is ridiculous. But anyways, I'll stop rambling. I appreciate you being here and listening to me, and I hope you enjoyed my video. And like I said, let me know what's up in the comments and your thoughts and everything. So I think that's all I have to say about it. So thanks for hanging out with me, and don't forget, the pale moth is always watching.